Sam never wanted to go back to his grandmother's old house, but life had a strange way of pulling people into places they feared the most. His mother called him on a Tuesday morning and told him that Grandma Rose had passed away in her sleep, and someone needed to go clean out the house before the bank took it away. Sam was the only one with free time, so the job fell on him like a heavy rock. He packed a small bag, got into his beat-up car, and drove for 6 hours through empty roads and dying towns until he reached the village of Hollow Creek. It was one of those places that time had forgotten, where the buildings leaned sideways and the trees grew so thick that sunlight barely touched the ground. The house sat at the end of a dirt road, right at the base of a steep green hill. It was a crooked wooden place with a sagging roof and windows so dusty they looked like blind eyes staring out at the world. Sam parked his car and sat there for a long moment, just looking at it. He had not been here since he was 10 years old, and now he was 26. 16 years had passed, but the house looked exactly the same, as if it had been frozen in time, while everything else around it aged and crumbled. He remembered summers here as a child, running through the tall grass, catching frogs by the creek, and listening to Grandma Rose tell her wild stories by the fireplace. She always talked about strange things, hidden kingdoms under the earth, doorways that led to other worlds, and creatures that watched humans from the shadows. As a kid, Sam had believed every single word. As a teenager, he had laughed at them, and now as a grown man standing in front of her empty house, he felt something he could not quite name, a mix of sadness and curiosity that sat heavy in his chest. He grabbed his bag and walked to the front door. The key was under the mat, exactly where his mother said it would be. He turned it in the rusty lock and pushed the door open, and a wave of cold air hit his face like a greeting from the dead. The inside was dark and smelled like old wood and dried flowers. Dust floated in the thin beams of light that squeezed through the curtains. Everything was still in its place: the rocking chair by the window, the shelf full of old books, the kitchen table with its faded cloth, and the row of family photographs on the wall above the fireplace. Sam set his bag down and walked through the room slowly, touching things here and there, remembering. In the kitchen, he found a half-empty jar of honey and a cup sitting by the sink, as if Grandma Rose had just stepped away for a moment and would be right back. But she was not coming back, and the silence of the house made that truth painfully clear. He spent the rest of the day sorting through her belongings. Clothes went into bags, dishes went into boxes, and papers went into a pile on the table for him to go through later. It was slow and tiring work, and by the time the sun started to set, Sam was exhausted. He made himself a simple dinner from canned soup he had brought with him, sat in the rocking chair, and ate in silence while the shadows grew long across the floor. That night he slept in his grandmother's bed, and he dreamed of her. She was standing in the backyard, pointing at the hill behind the house, and her mouth was moving, but no sound came out. Sam tried to walk toward her, but the ground turned soft like mud and pulled at his feet, and he woke up in the dark with his heart pounding. The next morning he went outside to get some fresh air. The hill behind the house rose up like the back of a sleeping giant, covered in thick grass and wild bushes. Sam stared at it and thought about his dream. He decided to take a walk up the hill to clear his head. The climb was steeper than it looked, and by the time he reached the halfway point, his legs were burning and his breath came in rough gasps. He stopped to rest near a cluster of large rocks and sat down on one of them. That was when he noticed something strange. One of the rocks had a shape that was too perfect to be natural. It was flat on one side and curved on the other, almost like it had been carved by human hands a very long time ago. Sam got down on his knees and looked closer, brushing away the dirt and moss that covered its surface. Underneath the moss, he found markings, lines and circles cut deep into the stone, forming a pattern he did not recognize. His heart began to beat faster as he cleared more of the surface, revealing more symbols that spiraled outward, like the rings of a tree. He sat back on his heels and stared at it. This was no ordinary rock, and those were no random scratches. Someone had made these marks on purpose, and they had done it with great care. Sam looked around. There was no one in sight, just the empty hill and the quiet trees and the gray sky above. He turned back to the rock and pushed at it, and to his shock, it moved. Not easily, it was heavy and stubborn, but it moved, sliding sideways with a grinding sound that echoed across the hillside. Not a natural gap or an animal burrow, but a carved opening with smooth walls and stone steps leading down into darkness. Cold air rose out of it, carrying a smell that was earthy and old and somehow sweet, like flowers that had been buried underground for 100 years. Sam's hands were shaking. Every sensible part of his brain told him to put the rock back, walk down the hill, get in his car, and drive away. But something else, something deeper and stronger than fear, told him to stay. He thought of Grandma Rose and her stories about hidden kingdoms and secret doors. He thought of the dream where she pointed at the hill, and he thought of all the years he had spent living a small, ordinary life where nothing surprising ever happened. He pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight. Then he took a deep breath, put one foot on the first step, and began to go down. The steps were narrow and steep, and the walls on either side were covered in the same spiral markings he had found on the rock. The air grew colder with each step, and the light from the opening above grew smaller and smaller, until it was just a tiny bright square far above his head. After what felt like 100 steps, the stairway opened into a wide tunnel. The ceiling was high enough for Sam to stand straight, and the floor was smooth and flat. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, showing walls of pale stone that glittered with tiny crystals. Sam stood there at the bottom of the stairs, alone in the silence, and he realized that his grandmother's stories might not have been stories at all. Something was down here, something old and hidden and waiting, and he had just opened the door to it. Sam stood in the tunnel for a long time, listening to the silence. It was not the kind of silence he knew from the world above. This was deeper, thicker, almost alive, as if the darkness itself was breathing. He aimed his phone's flashlight down the tunnel and took a slow step forward. The sound of his shoe on the stone floor echoed all around him, bouncing off the walls and fading into the distance like a whisper being passed from mouth to mouth. The tunnel stretched ahead in a straight line, and the walls on both sides were smooth and covered with those strange spiral carvings. Up close, Sam could see that the spirals were not all the same. Some were tight and small, others were wide and loose, and they connected to each other in ways that made them look like a giant map or a language he could not read. He walked for what felt like 10 minutes, though time was hard to measure underground. The air was cool but not uncomfortable, and there was a faint breeze on his face, which meant the tunnel was connected to something bigger ahead. Then the tunnel curved to the left, and Sam followed it around the bend, and he stopped dead in his tracks. The tunnel opened into a cavern so vast that his flashlight could not reach the other side. The ceiling was high above him, and from it hung long crystal formations that caught his light and threw it back in 1,000 tiny rainbows. The floor of the cavern sloped gently downward, and at the bottom, far below where Sam stood, there was a soft blue glow. Sam blinked and rubbed his eyes, thinking it might be a trick of the darkness, but the glow was real. It pulsed gently, like the slow heartbeat of something enormous, and it cast just enough light to show the outline of structures down below, shapes that looked like buildings. His mouth went dry. Buildings meant people, or at least they meant that people had once been here. Sam swallowed hard and began to make his way down the slope, his feet sliding on the smooth stone. As he got closer, the blue glow grew stronger, and the shapes became clearer. They were buildings, small ones, made of the same pale stone as the tunnel walls, arranged in neat rows along a wide path that served as a kind of street. The blue light came from clusters of crystals that grew out of the ground at regular intervals, like lampposts made by nature instead of human hands. Sam stepped onto the stone path and looked around in wonder. It was a village, a real underground village, complete with doorways, windows, and rooftops. Everything was built with incredible care. The stones fitted together so tightly that he could not slip a fingernail between them. But the village was empty. No voices, no movement, no signs of life. Just the soft blue glow and the deep silence that seemed to press against his ears. Sam walked down the main path, peering into doorways as he passed. Inside the buildings he could see stone shelves, stone seats, and carved alcoves in the walls that might have been used for sleeping. Everything was bare and clean, as if the people who lived here had taken all their belongings and left in an orderly fashion. At the center of the village, the path opened into a wide circular space, like a town square. In the middle of it stood a tall stone pillar, and on top of the pillar sat a crystal the size of a man's head, glowing with that same soft blue light. The spiral carvings covered every surface of the pillar, climbing upward in tight rings from base to top. Sam reached out and touched the pillar. The stone was warm under his fingers, which surprised him. Everything else down here was cool. He traced one of the spiral lines with his fingertip and felt a faint vibration, like the hum of electricity running through a wire. He pulled his hand back quickly. His heart was racing now, and his mind was full of questions that tumbled over each other like stones rolling downhill. Who had built this place? And why was it hidden under a hill in the middle of nowhere? And how had his grandmother known about it? Because she had known. Sam was sure of that now. Her stories had not been fairy tales. They had been hints, clues, pieces of a truth she had been trying to share with him all along. He thought about the dream again. Grandma rose, pointing at the hill, her mouth moving without sound. And he wished more than anything that she was still alive, so he could ask her what all of this meant. Sam continued past the pillar and found another tunnel on the far side of the village. This one was wider than the first, and the walls were covered not just with spirals, but with pictures, carved scenes showing figures that looked like people but were taller and thinner, with long arms and narrow faces. The figures in the carvings were doing different things. Some were building, some were farming what looked like underground gardens. Some were gathered in circles with their hands raised, and some were standing at the edges of what appeared to be a great body of water. Sam followed the pictures along the tunnel like a person reading a comic book from left to right. The story they told was clear even without words. These people had lived underground, they had built a civilization, and they had thrived for a very long time. But then the carvings changed. The scenes became darker and more chaotic. The figures were running, falling, reaching out to each other with desperate hands. Cracks appeared in the walls and ceilings of their carved world, and a new shape entered the pictures, something large and formless, like a cloud of smoke with eyes. Sam felt a chill crawl up his spine. Whatever had happened to these people, it had not been good. The tunnel took him deeper and deeper, and the air grew warmer. The blue crystals here were brighter, almost white, and they hummed with a sound that Sam could feel in his teeth. The ground beneath his feet trembled slightly, as if something far below was stirring. Then the tunnel opened into another cavern, and Sam stopped breathing. Before him was a lake, a vast underground lake of water, so clear and so still that it looked like a sheet of black glass. The blue crystals grew thick along its shores, casting their light across the surface. And in that light, Sam could see all the way to the bottom, where more buildings lay submerged beneath the water, their rooftops barely visible, like the bones of a drowned city. On the near shore of the lake, there was a stone dock with a small boat tied to it. The boat was carved from a single piece of dark wood, and it looked old but sturdy, as if it had been waiting here for someone to come and use it. Sam walked to the dock and looked down at the boat. A long wooden paddle lay inside it, resting across the two bench seats. The rope that held the boat to the dock was frayed, but still strong. He looked out across the lake. On the far side, barely visible in the blue glow, he could see a structure that was much larger than any of the village buildings. A tall building with wide steps leading up to a dark entrance, like a temple or a palace. Sam could feel it the way a person feels someone watching them from across a room. A pressure, a pull, a silent voice that called without using words. He knew he should turn back. He had already gone far deeper than any sensible person would go alone, with no one knowing where he was, and no way to call for help. His phone had lost signal the moment he entered the tunnel, and the battery was already down to half. But that pull was strong, and the curiosity that had brought him down the stairs was now a fire burning in his chest. He had spent his whole life avoiding risk, playing it safe, following the rules, and where had it gotten him? A dead-end job, a tiny apartment, and a loneliness so deep it had become invisible to him because it was all he had ever known. Sam stepped into the boat, untied the rope, picked up the paddle, and pushed away from the dock. The boat glided forward across the glass-smooth water without making a sound, and the drowned city passed beneath him like a dream. He paddled steadily, and with every stroke the far shore grew closer, and the temple grew larger. Up close it was even more impressive than it had looked from the other side. The steps were wide enough for 10 people to walk side by side, and the entrance was framed by 2 carved pillars that rose up into the darkness above. Sam brought the boat to the far dock, tied it up, and climbed the steps. At the top, he stood before the dark entrance and felt the warm air flowing out of it like breath from a sleeping mouth. He stepped inside, and the blue light from the crystals followed him in, revealing a vast hall with a high ceiling and rows of carved pillars stretching into the shadows. At the far end of the hall, something sat on a raised platform, something that reflected the blue light and sent it scattering across the walls in a dazzling display. Sam walked toward it, and as he got closer, he saw what it was. A chair, a throne really, carved from a single massive crystal that glowed from within with a light that was not blue, but gold, warm and bright like captured sunlight. And on the throne, there was a book. The book was thick and heavy, bound in dark leather that felt warm to the touch, and its cover was stamped with the same spiral pattern that covered every wall and surface in this underground world. Sam picked it up with both hands and felt a strange tingling in his fingers, as if the book was alive and aware that someone was holding it. He opened the first page and found writing, not in English, not in any language he recognized, but in flowing symbols that curved and looped across the yellowed paper like water flowing downhill. He could not read a single word, and yet as he stared at the symbols, something stirred in the back of his mind, a feeling like a memory trying to surface from deep water. Sam turned page after page, and the symbols continued, sometimes accompanied by drawings, maps of tunnels and caverns, diagrams of crystal formations, and portraits of those tall, thin figures he had seen carved into the tunnel walls. Their faces were long and calm, with large eyes that seemed to look right through him, even from the page. Near the middle of the book, he found something that made his breath catch in his throat. It was a drawing of the hill, his grandmother's hill, seen from above, with the house at its base, and the village of Hollow Creek spread out beyond it. The drawing was old, much older than the house itself, but the shape of the hill was unmistakable. And there at the top of the hill, the drawing showed the entrance, the same flat rock, the same carved steps, and a figure standing beside it. The figure was not one of the tall, thin people. It was a woman, small and round, with her hair pulled back in a bun. Sam's hands trembled. It looked like Grandma Rose. He closed the book and held it against his chest, breathing hard. This was impossible. The book was clearly hundreds of years old, maybe thousands, and yet it contained a picture of his grandmother, standing at the entrance to this very place. Unless the drawing was not of Grandma Rose at all, but of someone who looked like her. A relative, an ancestor, someone from a long line of women who had known about this place and guarded its secret. Sam looked around the great hall, at the glowing pillars and the crystal throne, and he felt the weight of something enormous settling on his shoulders. A truth that was bigger than him, bigger than his grandmother, bigger than anything he had ever imagined. He tucked the book under his arm and turned to leave, but as he took his first step, the golden light from the throne suddenly flared brighter. The entire hall lit up like midday, and Sam threw his arm across his eyes to shield them from the blinding glow. When the light faded, and he lowered his arm, he was not alone. A figure stood between him and the entrance, one of the tall, thin people from the carvings. It was taller than Sam by at least a foot, and its skin was pale and smooth, like polished stone. It wore a simple robe the color of deep water, and its eyes were large and silver, reflecting the blue crystal light like two mirrors. Sam's heart hammered so hard he thought it might burst right out of his chest. He took a step backward and bumped against the throne, and the book nearly slipped from his grip. The figure did not move. It simply stood there, watching him with those silver eyes, and its expression was not angry or threatening. It was sad, deeply, quietly sad, the way a person looks when they have been waiting for something for a very long time and are not sure if it has finally arrived. Then it spoke, and its voice was like the sound of wind moving through a cave, soft, hollow, and ancient. "You are the grandson," it said, and the words were in English, though they sounded strange coming from a mouth that was clearly not built for human language. Sam opened his mouth, but could not find any words. His tongue felt thick and useless, and all he could do was nod. The figure tilted its head slightly, studying him the way a bird studies a worm. "She said you would come," the figure continued. "She said it would take time, but you would come, and here you are." "You knew my grandmother?" Sam finally managed to say, and his voice came out as a rough whisper. "We knew Rose for many years," the figure replied. "She found this place when she was young, just as you have found it now. She came to us with the same fear in her eyes that I see in yours, and over time that fear became understanding, and understanding became friendship." Sam's legs felt weak. He leaned against the throne for support and tried to make sense of what he was hearing. His grandmother had known about this place, had visited it, had formed a relationship with these beings, and she had never told anyone except through her bedtime stories. "Why did she never tell us the truth?" Sam asked. The figure's silver eyes softened. "Because the truth is dangerous," it said. "This world was hidden for a reason. Long ago, my people lived above the ground, side by side with yours. We shared the land, the water, the sky. But your kind grew afraid of us, as humans always grow afraid of things they do not understand, and they drove us underground with fire and iron." The figure gestured up a hall around them. "We built this place as a refuge, a sanctuary where we could live in peace. For thousands of years, we have stayed hidden, watching your world from below, waiting for the fear to fade." "And has it faded?" Sam asked. The figure was quiet for a long moment. "No," it said at last. "The fear has only grown. Your world has become louder, faster, more dangerous, and our world has grown weaker. The crystals that give us light and life are dying, and without them, we will fade into nothing." Sam looked at the blue crystals that lined the walls. Now that the figure mentioned it, he could see that some of them were dim and cracked, their light flickering like candles in a draught. Rose understood this, the figure said. She tried to help us. She brought us things from above, seeds, tools, knowledge, and she kept our secrets safe for decades. But she was old, and her time was ending. And she told us that someone else would come, someone younger, someone who could do what she could not. What could she not do? Sam asked. The figure stepped closer, and Sam could feel the coolness of its presence, like standing next to a window on a winter day. Save us, the figure said simply. The word hung in the air between them, like a stone suspended in midair, heavy and impossible and real. Sam shook his head. I am nobody, he said. I work at a warehouse. I barely pay my rent. I do not know anything about underground worlds or dying crystals or saving anyone. You have the wrong person. The figure reached out and placed one long, cool finger on the book in Sam's arms. The book chose you, it said. It would not let anyone else take it from the throne. Rose tried many times, and it always returned to its place. But you lifted it as easily as picking up a stone from the ground. Sam looked down at the book. It sat in his arms as naturally as if it belonged there, and the warmth from its cover had spread into his chest, filling him with a feeling he could not name, something between courage and certainty, like knowing which way to go in the dark without needing a light. What is this book? He asked. It is the record of our people, the figure said. Our history, our knowledge, our laws, and our magic. Everything we are is written in those pages. And there is a section near the end, a set of instructions that Rose spent her whole life trying to read. Instructions for what? The figure's silver eyes locked onto his. Instructions for opening the surface gates, it said. There are 12 gates hidden around your world, sealed shut since the days when humans drove us underground. If they are opened, the energy of the sun will flow down into our crystals and restore them. Our light will return, our land will heal, and we will survive. And if they are not opened? Sam asked, though he already knew the answer. Then we die, the figure said, slowly, quietly, in the dark, and no one above will ever know we existed. Sam stood in the great hall, holding the book of a dying civilization against his chest, and he felt the full, impossible weight of what was being asked of him. He was a warehouse worker from a small town, a man who had never done anything remarkable in his entire life, and now a creature from beneath the earth was asking him to save an entire world. He looked at the figure's sad silver eyes, and he thought of Grandma Rose, and he thought of all the years she had spent carrying this secret alone. Tell me where the first gate is, Sam said. The figure, who told Sam its name was Lenari, led him to a small room behind the great hall. Inside was a stone table covered in maps. Not paper maps, but stone tablets, thin and flat, with lines carved into their surfaces, showing lands and mountains and rivers. Lenari placed one long finger on a spot near the center of one tablet. The first gate is here, it said. In the language of your world, this place is called Black Pine Forest. It is north of here, 3 days of travel by your roads. Sam leaned forward and studied the map. The carving showed a dense forest with a circle at its heart, the gate. Around the circle were more spiral symbols, and Sam noticed they matched some of the patterns in the book. How do I open it? He asked. Lenari looked at him carefully. The book will show you, it said. When you are near a gate, the symbols in the book will change. They will rearrange themselves into instructions that you can read. But only you, because the book has bonded with you. Sam opened the book and flipped through its pages again. The symbols still looked like nonsense to him, beautiful but meaningless. He closed it and looked at Lenari with doubt in his eyes. Trust it, Lenari said, and trust yourself. Rose did not choose you by accident. She saw something in you that you have not yet seen in yourself. Sam spent the rest of that day in the underground village, learning what he could from Lenari and two other beings who appeared from the deeper tunnels. A shorter one called Mivek, who had a quick laugh and nervous hands, and a very old one called Tessa, whose skin had turned almost transparent, showing faint blue veins of light running beneath the surface like rivers on a map. Tessa was the eldest of their kind still alive, and she moved slowly, each step careful and deliberate. When she spoke, the others fell silent and listened. "There were thousands of us once," Tessa told Sam as they sat in the village square near the glowing pillar. "We filled these caverns with music and light and life. Children played in the crystal gardens, and our scholars studied the deep patterns of the earth. We were happy." Her voice cracked slightly. "Now there are fewer than 200 of us, scattered in small groups across the underground world. The crystals fail a little more each year, and with them, our strength fades. Some of us have already gone dark." "Gone dark?" Sam asked. Tessa held up her hand, and Sam could see the blue light pulsing gently under her skin. "We are connected to the crystals," she explained. "They are not just our light source, they are part of us, woven into our bodies and our spirits. When the crystals die, we die with them. Going dark means the light inside a person flickers out, and they become still and silent, like a candle that is burned down to nothing." The horror of it hit Sam like cold water. These people were not just losing their home, they were losing themselves, one by one, fading away in the darkness they had been forced into. That night, Sam slept in one of the small stone houses, wrapped in a blanket that Mivek brought him. It was made of a material he had never felt before, softer than silk, but warm like wool, and it shimmered faintly in the blue light. He lay on the stone bed and stared at the ceiling, and tried to sleep, but his mind would not stop spinning. In the morning, he made his decision. He would go to Black Pine Forest and find the first gate. If the book really could guide him, then he would follow its instructions, and if it could not, well, at least he would have tried. Lenari walked him back through the tunnel to the stairway that led up to the hill. At the base of the stairs, the tall being stopped and placed both hands on Sam's shoulders. Its touch was cool and light, like the brush of a leaf. "Be careful," Lenari said. "The gates are not unguarded. When we sealed them, we placed watchers at each one, creatures made of crystal and shadow, bound to protect the gates from anyone who might try to open them. Over the centuries, the watchers have grown wild and forgotten their original purpose. They will not recognize you as a friend." "You are telling me there are monsters guarding the gates?" Sam said, and he could hear the disbelief in his own voice. "I am telling you to be prepared," Lenari replied. "Rose faced them too in her younger days. She was braver than she looked, your grandmother." Sam climbed the stairs back into the daylight, and the sun hit his face like a warm hand. He had been underground for almost a full day, and the world above felt strange and too bright, as if he was seeing it for the first time. He pushed the flat rock back over the entrance, gathered his things from the house, and got into his car. The book sat on the passenger seat beside him, its leather cover catching the sunlight and seeming to glow faintly gold. He drove north. The road to Black Pine Forest took him through small towns and long stretches of empty highway. He stopped for gas and food at a roadside diner where a waitress with tired eyes poured him coffee and asked where he was headed. "Up north," Sam said, "just exploring." She gave him a look that said she did not believe him, but did not care enough to ask more questions, and Sam was grateful for that. He drove until the towns disappeared, and the trees closed in around the road like walls. The forest here was old. Not the thin managed kind of forest that grew near cities, but deep and wild and tangled, with trees so tall they blocked out the sky, and roots so thick they cracked the pavement. A sign on the side of the road read Black Pine Forest, no services next 80 miles, and Sam felt his stomach tighten. He was really doing this, driving into the middle of nowhere with a magic book and a mission given to him by underground people. If anyone he knew could see him now, they would think he had lost his mind. He parked at a trailhead where the road ended and the forest began. There was no one else around, no other cars, no hikers, nothing but trees and silence and the distant call of birds. Sam picked up the book and opened it. For a moment, nothing happened. The symbols sat on the page as unreadable as ever. Then, slowly, they began to move. It was subtle at first, a slight shifting, like letters rearranging themselves in a word puzzle. But then, the movement grew faster, and the symbols flowed across the page like water, merging and splitting and reforming until they settled into new shapes that Sam could suddenly understand. Not as English exactly, more like ideas that appeared directly in his mind, bypassing language altogether. He did not read the words so much as feel them, and what they told him was this: follow the water. Sam looked around and listened. In the distance, beneath the bird calls and the wind in the trees, he could hear the sound of running water. A stream, or a small river, somewhere deeper in the forest. He tucked the book into his backpack, slung it over his shoulder, and began to walk. The forest floor was soft with fallen needles and damp earth, and the trees pressed close on all sides. Sam followed the sound of water, pushing through underbrush and climbing over fallen logs, until he found a narrow stream cutting through the forest floor like a silver ribbon. He followed the stream deeper into the woods. The light grew dimmer as the canopy thickened above him, and the air grew colder. After an hour of walking, the stream led him to a clearing, a perfect circle of bare ground surrounded by the tallest trees he had ever seen, their trunks so wide that 5 people holding hands could not have wrapped their arms around them. In the center of the clearing, there was a stone set into the ground, flat and round, about 6 feet across, covered in spiral carvings that glowed faintly green in the forest shadow. The first gate. Sam approached it slowly, his heart pounding in his ears. The book in his backpack grew warm against his back, and the tingling sensation spread through his whole body, making his skin feel electric and alive. He knelt beside the gate stone and opened the book. The symbols had rearranged themselves again, and this time they showed him exactly what to do. Place both hands on the center of the stone, close his eyes, and let the energy of the book flow through him. Sam placed his hands on the cold stone and closed his eyes. At first there was nothing, just darkness and the sound of his own breathing. Then the tingling in his hands grew stronger, building from a gentle hum to a roaring vibration that shook his bones. The stone beneath his palms grew warm, then hot, and the spiral carvings blazed with green light that he could see even through his closed eyelids. And then something roared. Sam's eyes flew open, and he saw it, the Watcher. It rose from the trees at the edge of the clearing, like smoke taking shape. A massive form made of shadow and broken crystal, with eyes that burned red, and a mouth that opened to reveal nothing but darkness inside. It was the size of a bear, maybe bigger, and it moved toward him with terrible speed. Sam did not run. He could not. His hands were locked to the stone as if glued there, and the energy flowing through him was too strong to break. The book's warmth blazed against his back like a fire, and the symbols in his mind screamed a single word: hold. The Watcher lunged at Sam with a scream that sounded like glass breaking and stone cracking at the same time. Its massive shadow body blocked out the trees and the sky, and its red eyes burned with a fury that had been building for centuries in the dark. Sam squeezed his eyes shut and held on to the stone with everything he had. The energy from the book roared through his body like a river breaking through a dam, flooding his arms, his chest, his head, filling every part of him with a golden light that pushed outward against the darkness. The Watcher slammed into the light and stopped. Sam could feel it pressing against the barrier, could feel its rage and confusion as it clawed and bit at something it could not break through. The golden light held firm, pulsing in rhythm with Sam's heartbeat, and with each pulse it pushed the Watcher back another inch. Then the stone beneath Sam's hands cracked. Not a bad crack, not a breaking, more like an egg hatching, a seal giving way after holding for too long. Green light erupted from the cracks and shot upward into the sky like a column of emerald fire, piercing through the canopy and disappearing into the clouds above. The Watcher let out one final shriek, a sound so full of pain and lost purpose that Sam almost felt sorry for it. And then it dissolved. The shadows fell apart like smoke in a strong wind, and the broken crystals that had formed its body rained down onto the forest floor, where they shattered into dust and vanished. Sam opened his eyes. The clearing was quiet. The gate stone had split into two perfect halves, and between them a shaft of green light still glowed, reaching up into the sky and down into the earth. He could feel it connecting to something far below, the crystal network of Lenari's world, and he knew, without being told, that sunlight would now flow through this channel like water through a newly opened pipe. His hands released from the stone, and he fell backward onto the soft ground, gasping for air. His whole body ached as if he had run 100 miles, and his fingers were red and tingling. But he was alive, and the first gate was open. He lay there for a long time, staring up at the column of green light and the circle of gray sky above the clearing. His mind was empty and full at the same time, empty of fear, full of something new and powerful that he did not yet have a name for. When he finally found the strength to sit up, he opened the book. The symbols had changed again, and this time they showed him a map. 11 more circles scattered across the world, each one marking the location of another gate. Some were nearby, others were impossibly far away. One in a desert, one on a mountain, one on an island in the middle of an ocean. 11 more gates, 11 more Watchers, 11 more moments of holding on, when every instinct screamed at him to let go. Sam closed the book and pressed his forehead against its warm cover. The task ahead of him was enormous, and he was just one person, tired, ordinary, and very much alone. But then he thought of Tessa's transparent skin and the fading blue light in her veins. He thought of Mivik's nervous laugh and the way it echoed in the empty village. He thought of Lenari's sad silver eyes and the weight of 1,000 years of waiting behind them. And he thought of Grandma Rose, who had carried this burden in secret for decades, because she loved these people and could not bear to let them die. Sam stood up, put the book in his backpack, and walked out of the clearing. The drive back to Hollow Creek took 6 hours, and by the time he pulled up to his grandmother's house, the sun was setting, and the hill behind the house was glowing orange in the last light. He went straight to the back of the house, moved the flat rock, and climbed down the stairs. Lenari was waiting for him at the bottom. "You opened it," Lenari said, and for the first time, Sam saw something like a smile on the being's long, pale face. "I felt it," Lenari continued. "We all felt it. The crystals in the eastern tunnels brightened, and Tessa said she could feel warmth in her hands for the first time in years." Sam felt a lump rise in his throat. "1 down," he said. 11 to go. They walked together through the tunnel and into the village, where a small crowd of the underground people had gathered in the square. Sam had not seen this many of them before, perhaps 30 or 40, all tall and pale, with those remarkable silver eyes. They watched him as he approached, and when Lenari said something in their language, they all placed their right hands over their hearts and bowed their heads. It was a gesture of gratitude so pure and so simple that Sam had to look away to keep himself together. Over the next few days, Sam stayed in the underground village and prepared for the journey ahead. Lenari helped him study the book, which revealed more of itself each time he opened it. The maps became more detailed, showing not just the locations of the gates, but the best routes to reach them, the dangers he might face, and the specific rituals needed to open each one. Mivek gave him supplies, a small pack of the crystal-powered lights they used underground, some of the shimmer cloth for warmth, and a tiny stone that hummed when he held it, and that Mivek said would allow Sam to communicate with them over long distances. "Think of us, and speak into the stone," Mivek said, pressing it into Sam's hand. "We will hear you, no matter how far away you are." Tessa came to see him on his last night in the village. She moved slowly through the blue-lit square, and sat down beside him on the stone bench near the pillar. Her skin was still mostly transparent, but Sam could see that the blue veins of light beneath it were slightly brighter than before. The first gate was already making a difference. "Rose would be proud," Tessa said quietly. "She always said you were the one. Even when you were just a small boy catching frogs by the creek, she saw the light in you." Sam smiled, and his eyes burned with tears he refused to let fall. "I thought she was just telling stories," he said. "The best truths often sound like stories," Tessa replied. "That is how they survive long enough to reach the people who need to hear them." She reached into the folds of her robe and pulled out a small object, a photograph, faded and creased, but still clear enough to make out the image. It showed Grandma Rose as a young woman, standing in this very square, surrounded by a group of the underground people. She was laughing, her head thrown back, and her eyes crinkled with joy, and the people around her were smiling too, their silver eyes bright with affection. Sam took the photograph and held it carefully, as if it might dissolve at his touch. This was his grandmother's secret life, a life full of wonder and purpose and love, hidden beneath the surface of the ordinary world. "Keep it," Tessa said. "Let it remind you why you are doing this." The next morning, Sam climbed the stairs for what he knew would not be the last time. He emerged into the daylight, sealed the entrance, and walked down the hill to his car. The book was in his backpack, the stone was in his pocket, and the photograph was tucked safely inside his wallet. He sat in the driver's seat and looked at the house one more time. He would not sell it. He would keep it, maintain it, make it a base for his journeys. This place was the beginning of everything, the doorway between two worlds, and as long as it stood, the connection would remain. Sam started the car. The map in the book showed the second gate in a place called Redstone Canyon, 3 states away. It would take him 2 days to drive there, and he had no idea what he would find when he arrived. Another watcher, another battle, another moment of holding on with everything he had while the world shook and roared around him. But he also knew something else, something he had not known a week ago, when he was just a warehouse worker, with a dead-end life and an empty apartment. He knew that the world was bigger and stranger and more beautiful than he had ever imagined, and that he had a place in it, a purpose that had been waiting for him since before he was born. He thought of Grandma Rose, and he could almost hear her voice, not the weak, tired voice of her final years, but the strong, warm voice of the woman in the photograph, the woman who had walked between worlds and kept the faith for a lifetime. "I will finish what you started," Sam said quietly, to the house and the hill and the memory of the woman who had loved him enough to trust him with the impossible. Then he pulled out of the dirt road and drove toward the horizon, where the second gate waited, and the adventure of his life was only beginning.